Aizen Sosuke finally returned to Bleach action in Bleach Thousand Year Blood War episode number 29. This episode was dedicated to the backstory and character conclusion of Jushiro Ukitake. It offered a closer look into the powers of Yhwach and dropped important hints about the future of the Hell Arc that continues to loom over Bleach's world. This video will be an in-depth analysis on all those details and more, and so if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. This episode is divided into three parts. First, it's Jushiro's attempt to take the place of the Soul King and his backstory, and then it's the events transpiring at the Soul King's palace inner holy shrine, and finally, Aizen Sosuke's conversation with Shinsuke Kyotoku. I'm going to go through each and every one of those sections and highlight the important details that is important to remember. Starting with part 1, Jushiro's sacrifice. So Ukitake decides that it is his destiny to take the place of the Soul King, and so he takes off his captain's robe and walks onto the platform that Urahara was working on, drawing his Zanpakuto, and he starts reciting certain words. As he's reciting these enchantments, we get triggered into the first flashback here of Jushiro as a child. The youngest form of Jushiro that we now have in the canon is him at 3 years old. At the age of 3, he was suffering from some type of lung disease that was killing him, and he was sure to not survive. And so his parents, who lived in the Rukon district at the time, took him to the shrine of a god they worshipped called Mimihagi. And there they laid their son at the feet of this god with an eye on its hand, and they prayed. We're not sure how long they prayed and for how many days they were praying. We just know that they really poured their heart out in front of this being because they wanted their son to live. And as Jushiro is lying on the ground, he starts to foam at the mouth, and his mother cannot bear to look him in the eye while he does that. So she reaches over and she tries to wipe away the foam from his mouth, and she's just overcome with grief, and she blames herself. She blames herself for not bearing him to be strong and bearing him to have this defect that will deny him the chance to live a long life. Now, we're not quite sure what it is that Mimihagi saw in them. We can only assume that he was moved by their belief, their determination, and their love for their child. But we don't know because Mimihagi doesn't speak. However, this liquid seemingly starts to fall from the eye on Mimihagi's hand, and it turns into this aura that envelops Jushiro and sends him into a different space. Now, this space looks oddly similar to the primordial sea, where we know the Soul King performed the technique that created the world called the Triplet World technique. The only difference here is the color palette is more pink and purple and white, as opposed to the primordial sea, which is more orange and a little bit darker in nature. As Jushiro stands in front of Mimihagi, he notices that tears begin to well up in the eye of Mimihagi, and he walks over and he scoops his hand and a bubble falls into it, and then he decides to drink it. Once he drinks it, he's overcome with Mimihagi's Ryotsu, and it envelops him, and he takes on like a black version of Mimihagi, and they're standing opposite each other in what is a very, very well-crafted scene. Beyond that, the aura dissipates and it turns his hair black for a second before reverting back to the normal white, and Jushiro wakes up, having now been seemingly healed. So we jump forward in time to Jushiro as a young teenager walking through the streets of the Rukon district, and this gives us our first look at Taguchi's Rukon district, which I must say looks really, really nice. The only criticism, if at all, is that it looks rather bright and happy. But I remember somebody commented in the last video I made that Jushiro, sure, he was in the Rukon district, but he wasn't necessarily dirt poor per se. And so maybe this is the part of the Rukon district that isn't so poor. Because if you remember, the way that the Rukon district works is the larger the number, and so the farther out you go from the epicenter, which is the Serete, the more lawless it becomes and the poorer it becomes. And so I believe Jushiro's Rukon district was in the 60s. And so he wasn't necessarily living a life of riches, but I believe that the tone of the particular district fits the bill. That's my conclusion. While he's walking, he sees this thug try to bully a grandmother, and while he tries to step in, the grandmother shows that she isn't to be trifled with. She actually uppercuts him and gives him a straight jab to the gut, taking him out for the count, and Jushiro actually stops to help him. Now, it's a little bit interesting because we don't know the relationship that Jushiro has with this individual. It seems like they're familiar with each other, we just don't know to what extent that is. In any case, Jushiro offers him the advice that if he wants to fight so much, he should just join the Shinyo Academy and become a soul reaper, and if he does so, people will praise him for fighting. He'll effectively be killing two birds with one stone, but this individual is much too brash and quite frankly stupid to listen, and he tries to punch Jushiro, who catches his fist and then forces a handshake before squeezing his hand and leaving a bruise. The guy ultimately understands that he cannot beat Jushiro and he backs off, walks away. We then fast forward to Jushiro as a slightly older teenager, sparring with Shinsui Kyotoku while under the instruction of Yamamoto Genryusai, Jushiro Sasuke, and Retsu Unohana. Those are 3 elite teachers if you ask me. The main takeaway from this skirmish is that they're both dual wielders and they're equally matched. I'd actually argue that Jushiro might actually be better than Shinsui because Jushiro was actually dealing with physical issues. He was coughing up blood like on 2 separate occasions, where Shinsui was fine the entire time, and yet they still came dead even. Now you might argue that Shinsui went easy on Jushiro, and probably, but it's just an interesting perspective there because Jushiro was actively bleeding out while fighting, whereas Shinsui was in tip-top condition. In any case, I believe that this is the first time we see the 2 of them interact together because it felt like an introduction, and based on this initial conversation, they're in the same class. However, Jushiro has been scoping out the competition and has already taken notice of Shinsui from a distance. And Shinsui, also being as perceptive as he is, also noticed that Jushiro was scoping out the competition by looking at him during class. Now they do hit it off, and Jushiro asks Shinsui for a favor. He wants Shinsui to help him procure these sweets called Monaka sweets. Now the initial idea is that Jushiro wants to give these sweets to his brothers and sisters, but he learns that there's sake in them, which just allows for some playful banter in an episode that will be grim and full of death and sadness. It was an opportunity to have a little bit of fun. A ton of years pass and we see the budding growth of these 2 young men, Jushiro Ukitake and Shinsui Kyotoku, attached at the hip, very, very close friends. At one point in time, Jushiro decides to take Shinsui to the Mimihagi shrine in the Rukon district, the very shrine where he was taken to as a child, and he shows him the statue inside the shrine. Now, Shinsui is of noble birth. He's not part of the noble families, but he is of nobility to some degree, like a high-ranking type of citizen. That's who Shinsui Kyotoku is, and so he's heard stories about the body part of the Soul King that dropped from the heavens, has supernatural abilities. The left arm governs advancement, and the right arm governs stillness. The 2 have a very heart-to-heart conversation where Jushiro lets Shinsui know that the only reason why he's still alive is because Mimihagi is extending his life, but has not been able to stop the disease. It's only stalling it. But Shinsui doesn't want Jushiro to give up on his dream of becoming a Soul Reaper, and so they tread on. We then jump forward in time yet again to the fallout of Kain's death. Now, if you remember in Bleach, Kain Shiba, who was the former lieutenant of Squad 13, was taken over by the hollow that would eventually become to be known as Aroniero, and he had to be put down. Rukikuchi ultimately was the one who ended Kain's life, but Jushiro Ukitake was there, and he was supposed to do something, but unfortunately his disease impacted his ability to fight, and Rukia was forced to have to step in to kill Kain herself. And this is the fallout of his death. Jushiro is obviously feeling very guilty about the entire situation. Jushiro and Shinsui have a conversation on the balcony of some place. I don't quite know where it is. It's probably somebody's noble house because it looked really, really nice. The set design of this episode overall was just sublime. And overall, the main takeaway from their conversation here is that Shinsui tells Jushiro that he knows that Jushiro feels bad that he's alive while other people who he feels deserve to live are dead. But he advises his friend that one day your time will come. And when your time arrives, you'll be ready to make the necessary sacrifice. In the forthcoming scene, it is now the fallout of Genryusai Yamamoto's death, and the 3 oldest captains in Jushiro Ukitake, Shinsui Kyotoku, and Retsu Unohana are having a meeting separate from the other captains. And the point here is they're all sad about what happened, and we all understand why. There's a little bit of playful banter between Shinsui and Unohana, which was great to see, being that Unohana was there while Shinsui and Jushiro were training as young bucks. And after they speak, Shinsui asks them to leave him alone so he can reminisce in peace and deal with his trauma of losing Yamamoto. When Ukitake and Unohana go outside, they have a conversation which to me is a great signifier of the hell arc that is to come. Unohana adopts the look on her face that lets you know that she's tapping into her killer side, as in she's serious here, she's not joking around. And she bids Jushiro farewell, and Jushiro says to her, "We'll see each other soon." Now I know that a lot of Bleach fans already know where this is going, and some people agree, some people don't. I fully understand. But in my opinion, This is a direct call out as foreshadowing and continuing to build the foundation for the Hell arc, in that both Jushiro and Unohana know that after they complete what it is that they're about to do, which for both of them is quite literally suicidal, they're not going to make it. They are going to die. And after they die, the Kanso Reisai will have to be performed on their souls. And there's only one place the Captain Class Shinigami go to after a Kanso Reisai is performed. They're going to hell. And they know that. And I think that this is Kubo continuing to build anticipation and hype for the Hell arc that everyone is excited to read in the future. So good on Kubo there. I loved it. And so now we go into part 2 of this episode, having to do with the battle in the Soul King's palace. We have Ichigo still clashing with Yuha Baha, still reeling from the fact that he's responsible for the end of the world. And as they're clashing, Yoruichi beckons the other three to attack. So she tells Orihime that Orihime should wait for an opening, and once she gets that opening, she should try and revive and put together the Soul King. To the other men, she tells them to flank her as they attack together. Ganju jumps into the sky and uses Seppa to create a dust smoke cloud that obscures the movement of both Yoruichi and Chad. Chad calls on the left arm of the devil, Brazo Izquierda del Diablo, if I'm saying that right, and he attacks Yuha, but Yuha blocks that attack. Yoruichi also tries to hit Yuha with a lightning attack of her own, but she's also thwarted by Yuha, who blocks both of them at the same time. But during that moment, Orihime does try to heal the Soul King, but she can't. Yuha proceeds to knock back both Chad and Yoruichi, and proceeds to be elated thinking that he's won. And it's at that moment that we see Jushiro's right arm of the Soul King penetrate the Shikomaku and go all the way to the Soul King's palace in mere seconds, I might add, and restore the Soul King. For the moment, as long as Jushiro's life force will let him, the Soul King will be alive. In this moment, we get another important detail about the future of Bleach here in relation to Yuha Ba's almighty power and its usage. When Mimihagi shows up, Yuha is shocked, and Yoruichi takes notice of Yuha's surprise, noting that Mimihagi escaped his sight. Now, the anime does a tremendous job of hitting this home. Not only do they have Yuha say it, they have Yoruichi confirm it, and then they go even beyond that and stamp it by showing you Yuha tapping into the almighty powers, trying to perceive the future of Mimihagi, and the screen cracks. He can't see the future of Soul King's fragments. That's important. We'll talk about it in the next sections to come, but for now, we'll just move on to the final part of this episode, the conversation between Aizen Sosuke and Shinsui Kyoraku. Shinsui attempts to talk to Aizen using only spiritual pressure, but Aizen doesn't answer. Now, if you think back to episode 6 of Bleach, when Yuha tried to go and speak to Aizen, not only is he visually represented differently, it's also a way for you to know that Aizen was not free back then, and so the only way they were able to talk, because again, Aizen's face is sealed naturally, because that's how the seal works. But when he was speaking to Yuha, he was bound, but his face was free and he was able to speak freely. That was not a physical conversation. That was a spiritual conversation. And I know that's weird to say because we're talking about Bleach, which is about souls as a bare minimum, but you understand what I'm talking about. The Soul Reaper in question here being Aizen Sosuke and Quincy in Yuha Baha were not talking physically with their lips. They were speaking through their spiritual pressure. And in Aizen's case, it was even impacting how he looked because the way Aizen is supposed to look when he's bound is not the way he looked when he talked to Yuha. And so even Yuha's sight was shaped by Aizen's spiritual pressure. All of a sudden, it makes sense why Yuha was caught under Kyoka Suigetsu when he entered Mugen, because Aizen's Ryatsu was all around the entire space, which, by the way, is an infinite space, but Aizen's Ryatsu filled the entire Mugen, and that's why Yuha was under Kyoka Suigetsu, because the moment he stepped foot in there, he was done. That's a very bold choice on Kubo's part, and I'm actually happy that he did so. But to move on to parts of the conversation specifically, Shinsui essentially wants Aizen to fight on their behalf, and he has to convince Aizen to do so. And, he doesn't manage to necessarily convince Aizen, but what he does manage to do is he makes Aizen want to go outside to see what it is that's happening on the surface of the Soul Society. And specifically, Shinsui goads Aizen, not by necessarily saying, oh, you need to help us save the Soul Society or we'll all die, etc., etc. He says, we have the same goal, which isn't necessarily to protect the Soul Society, it's to defeat Yuha Baha. Aizen Sosuke, the God King himself, will not be comfortable being number 2 to anyone. And so yeah, Aizen has every reason to fight against Yhwach. His pride demands it, his character disposition demands it. And especially when I think back to Aizen's moment when he defected from the Soul Society. He was being lifted up by the Manos Grande, the Gillians specifically, and as he was rising, he was talking to Jushiro Ukitake specifically, which that's like a really cool foreshadowing point on Kubo's part, because of all the people, when Aizen was speaking about the Soul King, he looked at the one person who was the embodiment of the right arm of the Soul King, Jushiro Ukitake. That was a very nice touch that Kubo made over there. But the point I'm trying to make in referencing this moment is that Aizen speaks about how no one stands at the top, neither you nor me nor the gods, but that unbearable vacancy will be filled. I alone will stand at the top. A man like that is not comfortable with the idea of Yhwach making his way to the Soul King's palace, seemingly succeeding in killing the king and trying to create a new world altogether. Aizen Sosuke stands in defiance of someone like that. But before he sits on Chair Sama, the infamous Chair Sama, one of the soldiers stupidly thinks that he needs to bind Aizen before he sits down, and he gets his arms evaporated, and we get to see Aizen's Ryatsu, and I think this is a new thing. I do not believe the manga did this, so kudos to the anime for doing this. When the blood splatters, before it hits Aizen's skin, Aizen essentially has his Ryatsu work like a Gojo Satoru Infinity, and I thought that that was a marvelous touch. I really geeked out for that when I saw it. But there you have it. That is the totality of the episode summary for what happened in Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode number 29. What I'm going to do here specifically now is zone in on certain talking points of interest in this episode, and I'll break them down. Starting with the Hell arc. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. Between Onohan's conversation with Jushiro and more specifically what Yuha said, because there's a certain point in the episode, specifically when Yuha is berating Ichigo for what he did, he talks about all the different worlds that are about to be destroyed, and he doesn't name the world of Hell. He actually names the Dawn Guy, Wakamundo, World of the Living, and Soul Society, but he doesn't name Hell. And to go even further, Ryogo Narita, the writer for the novels in Bleach, went online and he said that he found it extremely interesting that Yuha did not name drop Hell when talking about the worlds that will be affected by the Soul King's death, and that just gets him more excited for the Howls of the Jaws of Hell arc. And that's not all either. I believe Kubo, or Kubo's fan club, made a comment recently, a few days ago, when they mentioned that the anime assumes that you've read all of Bleach up until the Hell arc. And so there's going to be references and hint to the Hell arc in the anime, and it assumes that you're not going to be complaining about spoilers. All this for me is to say that prepare yourself to get more Hell content. Not just content in terms of the manga, but foreshadowing in the anime. And I actually want to stop and talk about it for a second there, because it's such a brilliant move on the part of Kubo and the animation team, because in a general sense, typically in anime, you have a manga that runs that becomes popular, and then Shueisha tries to fund an anime not merely for the purposes of making money off of the anime sponsorship and streaming deals and anything of the sort, but to then have the anime be so popular that people then go and get the manga to catch up and read on when the anime stops. But in the case of Bleach, if you ever wondered, beyond trying to just do right by Kubo and make money off the anime itself, what reason would Shueisha have to push the Bleach 1000 Year Blood War anime if we were to assume that they're practicing the universal law that we know exists? You make an anime to push the manga, so that the manga becomes great to push the anime, and you do the anime to push the manga. It's a give and take that has one benefit of the other success to rebound back to that one, to then rebound again to the other. But in the case of Bleach, if you assume that there's no more manga to be happening, there's really no reason to hype up the Hell arc in any way. But we know that Kubo is going to come back to the manga eventually, and so it's in Shueisha's best interest to maximize the hype and to maximize the intrigue that people have in the Hell arc manga that is to come. And so to me, if we continue watching Bleach 1000 Year Blood War for the next 2 cores that are left, the more Hell content foreshadowing that you see, the more confident I feel in the fact that Kubo is absolutely going to continue this, and Shueisha are betting on him to do so, because otherwise he doesn't have to do this. Why build to an arc that you're not gonna write, especially when you're adapting a 1,000-Year Blood War anime. It doesn't make much sense to me, but in my case, it does make sense because that's exactly what Kubo is doing. Hell Arc is going to happen, and they all know it. And it's actually interesting because while we're on the subject, I'm just going to put this out there so you guys just know it, so you just know it in your head. Pay attention to where 1,000-Year Blood War decides to end its anime, because between the chapter 685 of Bleach and chapter 686 of Bleach, or rather is it 684 to 685, before the 12-year time skip, a lot of things happen in between. Can't Fear Your Own World happens in between, and We Did Not Always Love You happens in between. And so if we get to the final episode of Bleach, 1,000-Year Blood War specifically, and they adapt the actual final episode of Bleach, it doesn't mean that all hope is lost. It sort of shows you that it's them trying to tie a bow to the 1,000-Year Blood War to leave it closed until it's further needed at some other time. However, if they end 1,000-Year Blood War prior to the actual introduction of Kazui Kurosaki and actually leave it open after the death of Yhwach, now you have a lot of reason to do your We Do Not Always Love You content, to do your Can't Feel Your Old World content, and to then feel more confident about a return for Bleach. And at that point, you feel even more confident in coming back to adapt the last chapter of Bleach and flow directly into the Hell Arc. That's just food for thought. I have no scoops on this, I just wanted to point it out for you guys to think about. Anyway, let's continue. Jushiro Ukitake is dead. While I want to make a full video dedicated to his character, I wanted to at least give a section where we can talk about my opinion on Jushiro Ukitake as a character. Now, Jushiro's been a fan favorite for a long time, and for good reason. He's kind-hearted, he's sweet, he's charming, I'm sure people would say that he's a very handsome man, he's respectable, and he incites belief in his followers. Unfortunately, he's been burdened with a very, very terrible disease and burdened with an even greater responsibility now that he is Mimihagi's host. He had a very respectful relationship with Kain. It never struck me as one where they would joke with each other. It didn't strike me as one where they would play pranks on each other or anything to that degree like you find in Rangiku and Toshiro or Hiyori and Shinji or anybody else of that same level. But Kain respected Jushiro, and Jushiro loved Kain as a subordinate, which in this context was the most important thing. His relationship with Rukia is a little bit more complicated because Jushiro blames himself for Kain's death, and he blames himself for forcing Rukia to have to endure that terrible, terrible fate of having to kill her vice captain because he knew how much Rukia cared about Kai and Shiba. That's why he did his best to try to save Rukia's life in the Soul Society arc. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to. And quite frankly, I feel like people don't talk about this enough. Jushiro Ukitake felt so strongly about defending Rukia and preventing her from dying that he was willing to hijack the entirety of that ceremony and become an enemy of the Shinigami to save his subordinate. I think that speaks volume about the type of man that he is. I know Kubo didn't highlight it necessarily, but I know for a fact that part of the reason he was so determined to save Rukia's life was because of Kain. He wouldn't be able to forgive himself if he let somebody that Kain cared about so much in Rukia Kuchiki be killed for a crime she did not commit. Good on Jushiro for that. Next, his relationship with Shinsui Kyoraku is a little bit more fair. It's more egalitarian because they're both peers. I'm very, very proud of the anime in this context because I don't know if people would agree with me on this point, but having watched the episode, I believe that the anime tried to catch some doubts as to whether Jushiro were stronger or weaker than Shinsui Kyoraku. Now, I understand that within the lore of Bleach, it makes sense for Shinsui to be stronger, but really, when I watch a sparring match between these two people, and I have one person cough up blood twice, and still it goes to a draw, I kind of have a hard time believing that Shinsui is leaps and bounds stronger than Jushiro. I don't think he is. And I feel like the reason why they did that is because we all know that Shinsui Kyoraku and Jushiro Ukitake have a date with destiny. They are going to fight in the Hell Arc because Jushiro will be fighting on behalf of Hell. And I have this very underlying feeling that the reason they made their battle go to a draw, but they accentuated Jushiro's sickness so much, is to make you wonder who would actually win in a fight between these two people. The Hell Arc continues to be the most anticipated arc in all of recent manga history, may save only to maybe One Piece's final arc. One thing I definitely want to make sure that I mention is the relevance of Ukitake's sacrifice, because I think that there's a very sad beauty to his life overall. Having been born as a sick child who did not, quote, deserve to live on, because his lungs were just so messed up from the very beginning, he was given a new chance of life. He was essentially forced into a deal with the devil almost. In exchange for not living a very long life and dying as an infant, he gained the power of Mimihagi, which was a burden in unto itself, and was forced to have to endure all that pain for thousands of years, presumably, or at the very least hundreds of years, only to then know that the day was going to come when he would have to give up this life in a very brutal, painful way for the salvation of the Soul Society. A sick man got the chance to give a life away that he did not deserve from the start. But the reason why Jushiro is happy doing so is because during the time when he was alive, he was able to form these bonds with all these people, and he's now gladly given up his life freely, joyfully, because it allows him to defend both his honor and preserve the life of his comrades. That's beautiful. Great Kubology content right there. The last thing I want to say about Jushiro here is the Hell Arc implications for his character, because I want to see an evil Jushiro and what that's going to do with Shunsui Kyotoku. You know, Shunsui Kyotoku's character is intriguing because of his unique way of interacting with his emotions. There are times when you know that he's breaking up inside, but he never shows it. I wonder what it would take to see him break. I wonder how far Kubo would go to see him break down emotionally. Would seeing a Jushiro Ukitake all decrepit and hellish finally break Shunsui? Or would it take something even more? I don't know, but I think an evil Jushiro Ukitake, a Hell Kamikake God Sworn Jushiro Ukitake, could be very interesting. I find it so that Kubo kept Jushiro on the sidelines for majority of Bleach's tenure. It's just very funny for me because the way the Howl of the Jaws of Hell chapter presents Jushiro, he's very clearly going to be an important staple of the arc. Kamikake God Sworn, the one person Zanpakuto who we did see. He's clearly going to be extremely important, and I can't wait to see what Kubo does with that. So, rest in peace, Jushiro Ukitake. You were a great man. Alright, the next talking point here is Aizen's return. So, we didn't get a ton in relation to Aizen content outside of that one conversation, but what I want to hit on here is that I believe that Aizen Sosuke should do more, and I hope that the plan for him is to do more. One change that might automatically make me excited to what they might do with Aizen is the fact that Nanana Najukup is dead. In the manga, Nanana Najukup actually interacts with Aizen, and Aizen does something new by having to react to Nanana. But Nanana's dead. And so Aizen's going to have to do some new things. I want to see Aizen destroy a bunch of people while sitting in the chair. That's what I want to see. I hope they give that to us. I believe that Aizen is going to have a profound impact on the war. You know, the moment you have a character like Aizen come onto your side, all of a sudden Ryotsu is not an issue. If you remember in this episode, you found that Kisuke Urata was complaining about not having enough Ryotsu to perform the portal opening that they were attempting to do. You don't have that problem if Aizen Sosuke is on your side. That's a fact. Also, this is like an underrated reason why Aizen turns the tide of the war. Who would you say are the most intelligent people in Bleach? You go Yuha Baha, Ichibe Hyosube, Aizen Sosuke, Mayuri Kuratsuchi, Shunsui Kyotoku, Tokinada, etc., etc. Aizen Sosuke arriving puts the intelligent people even more so on the side of the Soul Society. We're talking about a side in a war that boasts Mayuri Kuratsuchi, Aizen Sosuke, and Kisuke Urahara, three of the best scientists that Bleach has to offer. I feel like that's a really, really cool flex. And then finally, Aizen provides one of the very limited counters to the Almighty, both in immortality because he's immortal and in his Kyokasui Getsu, because Aizen has already placed Yuha on the Kyokasui Getsu when they first spoke in episode number 6, so that's also important. Finally, I want to talk about Yuha Baha and the almighty power gap that was exposed in this episode. So the reason why I'm excited about Yuha's almighty power gap being shown more is because it allows us to make sense of the final battle if and when it happens. If the Soul King's fragments are outside the range of the almighty sight, it calls so many different things into question. For example, if Mimihagi's outside the sight of Yuha, and so is Pernida, and so is Gerard Valkyrie. What do we say about something like the Hogyoku? Because if I remember correctly, the reason why Gin Ichimaru hated Aizen Sosuke is because Aizen took something, quote, precious from Rangiku. And if I'm remembering correctly, Rangiku was in possession of the Soul King's fragment, the nail of the Soul King, I believe. And so if that then plays into the Hogyoku, I have to wonder, does the Hogyoku now fall under the same rules as a Soul King's fragment? And better yet, let's even go farther. Let's talk about Ichigo Kurosaki. We know that the Soul King in of itself is immune to the powers of the Almighty because he himself had the Almighty. But what connection does Ichigo have in all of this when he is the only person in the world of Bleach, not counting maybe somebody like Ginjo or Hikone, who was able to sever the ties that the Soul King has with the rest of the world? I mean, just think about it there. The only person who was able to sever the ties that the Soul King had to all three worlds was a person who was a Shinigami, Quincy, Hollow, Fullbringer, and Human. I don't know if I got all of them right there. And then we took that man there and put him through the Irazusander trial. And then we had him bear the weight of the king in his memories, in his revelations, and in his power. And they actually go as far as to show you a visual representation with Ichigo having the Almighty in his eyes. How are they going to play into that? Because when I think about Ichigo Kurosaki, and I know I'm rambling here, but this is important, Ichigo Kurosaki has succeeded in getting the power, like the raw power necessary to fight against people like Yhwach and beyond. What he lacks is the hacks. What he's lacking are the abilities, which is why Yhwach is able to overcome him so easily when they first fight, because Yhwach is just using the Almighty, and the moment the Almighty comes into play, without the necessary special abilities, you can't really do anything about it. That's the same reason why Ichigo lost to Askin Naklavar, which I hope they remove because I don't want to see that. But it's true. In the world of Bleach, you can have raw power, but if you lack certain hacks abilities, you get beaten by somebody who was technically weaker than you, but has abilities that are way more broken than you. That's why it's so important for Ichigo to have something else, and I need him to get something else. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really difficult to win this fight. Or, there is an alternative where if Ichigo alone does not have the special abilities necessary to fight against Yhwach, that's why you have other people. That's why you have an Aizen be in the fight. That's why you have an Uryu be in the fight. Because they then do the hack stuff that Ichigo needs, and Ichigo is then able to give them the raw power that they need, and so on and so forth. And so keep an eye on Ichigo, keep an eye on Aizen, and keep an eye on Uryu Ishii. Because these are three people who I can very easily see the anime and Kubo scheme a way for them to have fragments of the Soul King, or for them to have abilities akin to the Soul King that allows them to counter the Almighty if they're together, which would make a lot of sense of the final battle in Bleach. Anyway, so I'm going to end things right there. Please let me know what you think about this in the comment section down below, and I'll be talking with you guys in the next Rebirth video. I hope you enjoyed this, guys. Please, please, please support the channel. We really appreciate it. Until next time, take care, stay healthy. It's your boy signing out. Peace.